I'm like a cross-cultural psychologist. And when you think about culture, religion is absolutely an important part of it, right? And even if the US and a lot of the developed world have become less and less religious, it doesn't mean that the influences aren't still there in the culture.
Right.
And so if you take Japanese culture, Japan is not a religious country. If you ask Japanese people, the vast majority would say, I'm not religious. But if you actually look at their behaviors, it's very spiritual. So where does that come from? It's a combination of Shintoism and Buddhism, primarily Zen Buddhism. And so Shintoism is, it's really interesting because it's not really a religion. It's actually closer to nature worship and ancestor worship. So it's closer to indigenous practices. And so there's no scripture, there's no founder, there's no text, there's no like religious, organized religious like time to go during the week. You just go whenever, right? And then there are Shinto shrines everywhere in Japan. And you can just go for a walk. It's almost like a Starbucks in some ways because it's just there and it's everywhere and it's accessible. So at some point in history, like the Japanese imperial government made it a state religion. And that's when, Buddhism, because it was a foreign influence, they tried to separate Shintoism and Buddhism. But before then, and since then, Buddhism and Shintoism have basically been just this morphed thing. And if you ask Japanese people, like, which part of your beliefs are Shinto or Buddhist, they would be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Because that's actually another interesting part of Japanese culture is, we have Shinto New Year's. So we go to a shrine for New Year's. We have Buddhist funerals. And Obon, which is a Buddhist homecoming festival for our ancestors and our deceased relatives, happens every August for a few days. And then we also do Christmas. Everybody, because of KFC's brilliant marketing, eats fried chicken and Christmas cake on Christmas. But, so there is this interesting tendency in Japanese culture to accept and try to adopt and adapt different practices from different religions in different countries. And I think that's part of the reason why, because Japan is focused on social harmony, right? It avoids conflict, which is usually good, but sometimes not good. If you think about, scandals, corporate scandals and things like that.
Right.
But in terms of global collaboration, I think there's something we can learn from this tendency to not create conflict, but say, hey, let's try to see, how we can fit together and work together. And in Japanese culture, so before you eat every meal, you say itadakimasu, and you put your hands together. And it basically means I'm receiving this gift. So it's this sense of gratitude and appreciation, not just for the food, but for the person who made the food for you, the suppliers, the farmers, even the bowl you're eating it in, the chopsticks. So it's more chronic, the spirituality in Japan, that you don't even really notice that it's a spiritual gesture.
Right.
And then, how Japanese people package things. Some people joke that it's excessive because it takes like 10 minutes to unwrap something.
Right.
But again, it's about appreciating what's wrapped. But from the gift giver's perspective, you're showing your appreciation for the recipient. And when you're the recipient of the gift, you take time to unwrap it so you don't rip the wrapping paper, because you're showing your respect for the person who gave it to you and the wrapping paper and the object. So it goes back to animism,
Mm,
right? It's
right.
because Shintoism is all about animism. The belief is that there's a God, it's not God with a capital G, but more like a deity in every object and every phenomena in the world, even cell phones. So
Mm,
it's not just, what you would think of as natural objects. So it can
right.
be really anything. So there's an interesting Japanese ritual, which is actually Buddhist in origin. So this again gets
Mm.
confusing. That's called kuyo, and kuyo is usually for your deceased relatives or deceased people, but it's also done for eggs,
Hmm.
eel, needles,
Oh.
cockroaches. I mean, you name it. So like a household pest company in Japan, every year they hold this kuyo for the cockroaches and whatever household pests that get killed by their products.
Oh, wow.
So it's this saying, I'm sorry that we're killing you, and we are acknowledging it. And so there's also a huge doll kuyo for dolls, like stuffed animals, even Hello Kitty, Pikachu.
Really?
Um, that happens not just on a specific day, but depending on the shrine or the temple. So again, it's not necessarily Shinto or Buddhist, um, but you feel a little uncomfortable if it was your favorite teddy bear and you don't really have a place for it, or someone gifted you a doll a few years back and you don't have space for it. You don't want to just throw it in the trash. So you bring it to a temple or shrine so they can properly appreciate them and send them off. And then the egg thing, which is interesting, but anything that's like seafood or anything you eat that's sacrificed for human purpose, there are these monuments you can see all over Japan,
Hmm.
big and small. So it's really not not spiritual, right? Like Japan is spiritual. They just don't understand or really notice that they're spiritual. But
Right. Yeah.
it does get reflected in behaviors.